Time to abandon ship.
Oh no!
Here we go.
Can I persuade you to join us for a drink? It's a tradition. Here, here.
Jar Jar, homie, my main man, quickly. Before the Separatists attack, get into the escape pod.
Hey! This is escape, then we're the pod.
Welcome back to Star Wars Escape Pod. I'm your host, Josh, and we have our co-host, Blake and Bryce in the Escape Pod to chat all about George Lucas's original Star Wars trilogy. I have in front of me the gargantuan red XXL edition of Paul Duncan's Star Wars Archives book covering 1999 through 2005. That is the prequel book. And, this is a numbered edition. Huge flex there. But yeah, we're going to dive right in. We're going to go right to the end. And there is a whole lot about George Lucas's original vision for the sequel trilogy. Lots to talk about there. So let's dive right in.
Another happy landing.
Well, hello there. Hello there.
Hello.
How are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Hello.
Hello.
Josh, I just wanted to open by saying my condolences.
For?
Well, you must be getting older. Your eyesight must be going because you had to get the XXL version.
Yeah.
Get the big font.
I try and make it myself feel better saying it's a limited edition. Take it out.
Comes with a free pair of spectacles.
Yeah.
Bifocals.
Exactly. We're not going to waste any time, but I just wanted to kick things off with, because, this can be a sensitive issue for some people who do love the movies that we do have. And there are others of us that do not. And, it's always going to be a divisive thing, but this is the original sort of conceptual of what George would have done with his movies. And this isn't from the internet. This isn't from an article of any kind. This is a firsthand interview published in a very esteemed book by Paul Duncan, who sat down with George in person. He sat down with a lot of people, Ben Burt and Doug Chiang and Rick Mccallum. A lot of people in this interview. And page by page, there's a lot of artwork and production reports and just like the things that you don't really need to look at, but like are just so cool to all us nerds, right? It's a pretty sweet book. The XXL format kind of gives you like a nice wide spread on all these cool, awesome images and stuff like that. Towards the end of the book, though, Paul asks George some really interesting questions about sort of why he sold the company and, what he would have done if he hadn't. And there's some very familiar things that George says in this interview, things that he's told Charlie Rose on the Charlie Rose interview way back when he first sold the company. And The Force Awakens was being developed by a new team of people. And J.J. Abrams had been brought on to help write and direct that movie. And this is sort of reminiscent to that because this book was... the interview took place before this book was published. I think it was in 2020 that this book was published. And the publisher is Tashin. They make some amazing, super large format things. They do like a James Bond one. They do tons of stuff. They got a classic Walt Disney one. Really nice things. Yeah.
Fan stuff then, like really
Fan
high
stuff,
quality,
yeah.
collectible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Not cheap books either. But the interview, totally worth reading. And there's a budget version of this book, by the way. There's like a $40 version, which is like way smaller. You just lose some of the nice big images, but that's, all the text is the same. So
It is a pocket-sized book.
yeah. Yeah. Regular size.
It has
book.
thumbnails instead of
Yeah, it's
photographs.
about the size of Order of the Phoenix over there.
For the kids with good eyes.
Yeah.
That's right. Comes with a magnifying
For
glass.
kids with good eyes. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to go section by section through this interview and just kind of break down exactly what's going on here. But yeah, just a question for either of you guys. Do you remember anything about the Charlie Rose? If you'd watched Charlie Rose interview with George?
Just that famous quote.
Oh yeah.
How does it go again, Josh?
You can go ahead. Yeah. It's
Anakin wouldn't be super happy with
No, Anakin.
George's words.
Yeah, I think he'd be quite offended.
it's a good interview. It's quite difficult to watch sometimes, only because like I love George's movie so much that it's like kind of a wrench in my gut knowing like what we could have had, and you know more George Lucas Star Wars. You know, like I want more. I want more of that.
It was on the horizon, and
Yeah.
After kind of what we're getting into here with the book and the interview, him talking about it, I was surprised that he was willing to get back on the horse again after what happened with the prequels. Because towards the end, it just seemed like he was kind of fed up.
Yeah, that's part of it actually. So we're definitely gonna get into that. But yeah, do you guys remember anything about that? No, nothing.
Not too much. Like I said, I think I've only seen like 10 minutes of it aside from
Yeah.
the stuff in the news. But interested to hear, what he had planned and what we could have had in, or like what. There's like a multiverse out there where Star Wars fans are happy, right?
For sure. For sure.
And this is going to be an entirely alternate universe also to what we got with EU, I would think.
Yeah.
So there's a multiverse of 3 at the moment.
Which I don't know, maybe, yeah, I guess that's like an initial question I have is what was his plan in relation to like the EU if he already had this laid out for a sequel trilogy, right?
That's something he answers. Is sort of like what he would have done, with the trilogy. So focus is completely on this book today, everybody. If you want to watch the Charlie Rose interview, I will link it in the description below in this podcast. But yeah, today we talk all about this interview between Paul Duncan and George Lucas. So I'll start off kind of by reading the first section here, and then I'll kind of give you guys a signal as to when we can kind of converse about this. All right, so Paul Duncan says, and it's sort of stylized like a script, like it's like the person saying whatever, and then what they said, and then the other person, and so on and so forth. It's like reading like a stage script. Okay, so Paul Duncan says, Doug Chiang, Ryan Church, and others described to me how much freedom you gave them and allowed them to do the best work of their lives. The whole environment that you've created, Lucasfilm, the ranch, ILM, Skywalker Sound, has been inspirational. So I wonder why you passed control of Lucasfilm on to Disney in 2012. George Lucas says, at that time, I was starting the next trilogy. I talked to the actors and I was starting to gear up. I was also about to have a daughter with my wife, and it takes 10 years to make a trilogy. Episodes 1 through 3 took from 1995 to 2005. Paul Duncan says, so if you started in 2012, you'd finish in 2022. And George Lucas said, I'd still be working on episode 9. In 2012, I was 69. So the question was, am I going to keep doing this the rest of my life? Do I want to go through with this again? Finally, I decided I'd rather raise my daughter and enjoy life for a while. I could have not sold Lucasfilm and gotten somebody to run the productions, but that isn't retiring. On Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, I tried to stay out of the way, but I couldn't. I was there every day. Even though the people were friends of mine and they did great work, it wasn't the same as me doing it. It was like being once removed. I knew that probably wouldn't work again, that I'd be frustrated. I'm the one with those micromanager guys. One of those micromanager guys. I can't help it. So I figured I would forego that, enjoy what I had, and I was looking forward to raising my daughter. Also, I wanted to build a museum, which I'd always wanted to do. So I was thinking, if I don't do this now, I'll never get that done. I've spent my life creating Star Wars, 40 years, and giving it up was very, very painful. But it was the right thing to do. I thought I was going to have a little bit more to say about the next 3 because I had already started them, but they decided they wanted to do something else. Things don't always work out the way you want it. Life is like that.
I can just piggyback on what I was saying earlier. I'm very surprised that was getting back into it again. I guess, when you're in love with something, you forget about the bad, and over time, you get reinvigorated again. Because I know I think, with the fallout of a lot of the fandom after the prequels, left a lot of bad taste in his mouth, which I always thought fueled the sale to Disney. But it seems, after reading this quote, it had more to do with where he was at that point in his life.
Yeah, for sure. It's rough, like, to, you invest so much of your life, like, into something, right? And then you kind of you're a guy like that, he's known for that something, to sell it. I think, like, the question of, like, identity really comes to mind. It's like, oh, I'm the guy who made Star Wars. Like, I'm selling that.
Yeah, you're selling a huge part of, like, really who you consider yourself to be.
Yeah. And that's why on the Charlie Rose interview, if anyone watches that, he describes Star Wars as, like, his children. He's like, Charlie Rose, like, you sold your children. It's like, well, it's still a story, but I mean, sold his one child for his other child, I guess.
There you go.
Yeah.
Though he did speak on a point that I think a lot of fans often bring up, which is they want the relationship that George had with Star Wars and the films that we had the original trilogy with Empire and Jedi, where he was kind of in the back seat guiding the story. But he speaks directly to, he's just not capable of doing that because he's so hands-on. Yeah.
And the arguments, I've heard it before. It's just like, oh yeah, the best Star Wars movies are the ones that he didn't direct. It's like, well, he was there, like, every day. He was someone else's name as the director for the movie, but, like, it doesn't mean he wasn't there next to the director with his hand on their shoulder as they did their job, right? And, like, that's kind of the whole point, like, why he did the prequels in the beginning. It's like,
well, he originally didn't want to. Didn't he approach Spielberg and some of the directors? They all said, like, Spielberg, what I remember the quote was like, George, you do it.
Yeah. Well, this guy, I think Spielberg knows George a lot. Like, he knows him well, right? Like, he knew that if George hired somebody else, he would still be just as involved anyways. And, at least this way, he wouldn't be kind of bumping heads with anybody.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he would get the authentic story that he wanted. And, that's all that mattered, right? It's just a lot of work, for one guy, right?
It is, yeah.
Which is why you have to be good at delegating, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's why a lot of those older films are successful, because he found, like, talented people to delegate to.
Totally. Okay, so here's the next section here. It's called The Chosen One. So George Lucas says, when writing the movies, I tried to make sure that the aliens and the droid that got killed, but not the people. Paul Duncan says, a lot of stormtroopers died. And George Lucas says, that's right. But you didn't know that they were people. We did kill 3 humans, and that was unfortunate. I was always bothered by it. And Paul Duncan says, when was that? And George says, on the Death Star, when Han and Luke go into the prison, when Chewie to rescue Leia. They shoot 3 Imperial guys, and the guards drew their guns and fired first, but it's still a shame. And Paul says, really? And George said, yeah. We very consciously didn't kill very many humans in those movies. Paul says, what about the stormtroopers? They look
the rebels.
What about the stormtroopers? They look robotic, but they're not. And George says, how do you know what they are? And Paul says, did you have a different idea of what they were? And George says, yeah, they started out as clones. Once all the clones were killed, the Empire picked up the recruits like militia. They fought, but they weren't very good at what they did. That's why they kept missing. Paul says, yeah. And George says, yeah, that's why they kept missing. Then after the rebels won, there were no more stormtroopers in my version of the 3rd trilogy that I had planned for the 1st trilogy to be about the father, and the 2nd trilogy to be about the son, and the 3rd trilogy to be about the daughter and the grandchildren. Episodes 7, 8, and 9 would take ideas from what happened after the Iraq War. Okay, you fought the war, you killed everybody. Now what are you going to do? Rebuilding afterwards is harder than starting a rebellion or fighting the war. When you win the war and you disband the opposing army, what do? The stormtroopers would be like Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist fighters that joined ISIS and kept on fighting. The stormtroopers refuse to give up when the Republic win. They want to be stormtroopers forever. They go to a far corner of the galaxy, start their own country and their own rebellion. There's a power vacuum, so gangsters like the Hutts are taking advantage of the situation, and there is chaos. The key person is Darth Maul, who had been resurrected in the Clone Wars cartoons. He brings all the gangs together. Paul says, was Darth Maul the main villain? And George says, yeah, but he's very old. And we have two versions of him. One is with a set of cybernetic legs like a spider, and then later he has metal legs, and he was a little bit bigger, more of a superhero. We did all this in the animated series. He was in a bunch of episodes. Darth Maul trained a girl, Darth Talon, who was in the comic books as his apprentice. She was the new Darth Vader, and the most of the action was with her. So these were the two main villains of the trilogy. Maul eventually becomes the godfather of the crime in the universe because as the Empire falls, he takes over. The movies were about how Leia, who else is going to be the leader, is trying to build the Republic. They still have the apparatus of the Republic, but they have to get it under control from the gangsters. And that was the main story. It starts a few years after Return of the Jedi, and we establish pretty quickly that there's this underworld. There are these offshoot stormtroopers who have started their own planets, and that Luke is trying to restart the Jedi. He puts word out, so out of like 100,000 Jedi, maybe 50 or 100 are left. And the Jedi have to grow again from scratch. So Luke has to find 2- and 3-year-olds and train them. It'll be 20 years before you have a new generation of Jedi. By the end of the trilogy, Luke would have rebuilt much of the Jedi, and we would have the renewal of the New Republic, with Leia, Senator Organa becoming the Supreme Chancellor in charge of everything. So she ended up being the chosen one.
There's a lot there that happened.
Yeah,
right?
I was just thinking that.
I don't know. There's a lot to unpack there because there's even stuff I don't agree with, right? Or like I'm not quite sure is kind of the direction I would have wanted it to go.
Mm-hmm.
But I think because Star Wars has always been very political, so I think it's good to make it. When he's talking about it, it always takes inspiration from real life events, and it's like a twist. It's like that space, right? Star Wars. So I think the stuff he was saying about like our current wars and rebuilding, I think that is a really good idea, and would have made for a very interesting and
because you never see that in the sequels. You don't really see the rebuilding of that. You only just see like when they question that. It's like, oh, where do we go from here? And then all of a sudden in the next movie, like everyone just shows up and ready to go.
Right. I think we're starting to see more of that now in the Mandalorian era, but in the sequels themselves, not really. Though they did steal the fact that the stormtroopers went off and created their own kind of country or whatever.
Yeah. They did take that.
Because I really like it. Like, you don't have to have all 3 of the sequels we're rebuilding for all 3. If it's a bit slow, maybe a bit dry.
Yeah.
But in the same way, I think the Phantom Menace felt very different. Like, it's not like the Phantom Menace was extremely political and not like you only get the war at the end, right?
Right.
But it made the galaxy feel a lot more complete. Like you get to see the Jedi doing their peacekeeping missions. It's more about like how the Republic functions,
right?
Why the democracy is corrupt and why it's really hard
dealing with trade routes and blockades.
Yeah, and that is like insanely good world building. And although I think a lot of people make fun of it because it's political and maybe not the most exciting, I think there's a lot of the older audience that is like pretty jazzed to see that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's funny.
All
it's
3 of those movies
well.
don't have to be like that. Just the first one, right? And then you can get into some more of the bread and butter lightsaber, like action and betrayals. Yeah, probably more of the stuff with Darth Maul, or that then maybe in the second movie we get that like reveal of some sort of First Order or the Stormtrooper nation that's come back. Yeah,
right. So it would escalate basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that'd be pretty good flow.
And then you get a good kind of twist reveal at the end and cliffhanger.
Mm-hmm.
I think this Leia becoming the Chancellor was a cool idea. I like that a lot. I believe that was actually in Colin Trevorrow's episode 9 script. You know,
interesting. Okay.
When the leaks came out about how that story would have worked out, I believe that would have been a thing if Carrie Fisher hadn't obviously passed away, right?
Yeah, that complicated a lot of things.
Yeah.
There's a novel as well. Was Leia in line to be more of a political leader until they found out she was Darth Vader's daughter? Was that a thing?
Yeah, you're talking about Bloodline. So that book takes place kind of between episodes 6 and 7.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big scandal that comes out because of that, right? And that's one of the few things, I guess, that kind of leads her to go on her own and become the resistance leader as opposed to stay within the New Republic in those politics, right? So that book described that pretty well. I don't think it
sounds
really,
like a bad decision, though, right? You're outed as being related to an evil dictator, so you leave and raise an army.
Yeah, it doesn't look so great.
No one else is gonna do it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But you see how that, like how it comes off pretty poorly.
Yeah.
Right? You're like you're pretty much making an extremist organization within the government that you built. You're like you are.
Yeah.
I don't know what you tried to fight against. You're kind of just
Come on, the warmonger almost.
Yeah. But although I actually really like that because that makes so much sense. Like who would allow, old Adolf Schmittler's daughter to be chancellor? Like,
yeah, right.
Like I don't know how you could be.
It's fear, right? Fear that they'll become their parent or whatever.
Yeah, you could be a saint, and I think people still would be like, I'm not sure about this.
Yeah,
like, yeah.
I what you were just saying, Blake, about the various different types of continuities that we have now at this point. There's a few, right? There's the canon. There's the old EU pre-Disney. There's the Infinities continuity, which is its own thing in the comic books.
Is that the Lego?
No, it's in the comic books. They did like a what if situation.
Is that like white Darth Vader?
Yeah. So they did that, and then now obviously we have these sort of what would have happened if George had not sold the company, right? So there's a couple kind of different continuities there. Taking something from the EU like Darth Talon and making that sort of a main villain in George's story, something that he really liked a lot. This is not the first time he's done that. He's actually done that before. He really loved Ayla Secura. He has got a thing for Twi'leks. He really loved Ayla Secura a lot when he saw her on a comic book. And so he put her in Attack of the Clones. That was the whole reason why she existed in Attack of the Clones, was she was in a comic book first.
Yeah.
And he's like, I like that. I'm going to put that in my movie.
That's pretty cool. So I thought originally, because the first time I saw it was like in the video games. I think it was in Battlefront 2, like the 2005 version.
Oh, that was way after Attack of the Clones, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the first time I'd seen her. So I thought that...
Wait, you've seen her in Attack of the Clones?
I think I didn't notice her in Attack of the Clones is what happened. Because I recognized...
I noticed her right away.
Because I noticed her. Because I definitely noticed her in Revenge of the Sith.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, he's done this before, right? Like he's taken a character from the EU, used into his thing. Quinlan Voss is another great example. But to take such a weird sort of strange story from a completely different time frame within the EU, right? And then bring it into his story, I thought was very curious.
Yeah, actually raises a good question. We should touch on that because what is the time difference? Because
it's a lot, right? Like it's like
it's with
we're talking Cade
Skywalker.
Right? It's like
Cade?
Hundreds of years.
Yeah. It's he is the grandson of Luke.
Okay.
Is it grandson or is it great grandson? Because Luke's long gone at this point.
Yeah, it would have been Luke, and then Luke has Ben, and then Ben has Cade. I'm pretty sure. There might be one more actually. He might be the great grandson of Luke. I think Ben has. What is the other Skywalker called? Maybe I'll have to look it up. But I think there might be 3 generations.
Yeah, I think there's something. Yeah, because I had the feeling that Cade Skywalker was like 100 years after.
It's like Kai Skywalker or something. Cade Skywalker. It's like
I think it's like 100 years after Return of the Jedi. I think that
sounds about right.
Yeah, it's kind of like the whole comic series kind of, that was like the thing. It was like 99 years after the Battle of Endor or something.
Right.
You know, it was something like that.
Is that pre or post Yuuzhan Vong?
Oh,
Post.
Okay.
Post.
It's
yeah.
like during the rebuilding era. Or,
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So like most of the EU that most people are familiar with all kind of happen way before this event,
Mhm.
right? And then Cade Skywalker is like that's his story. Darth Talon is a villain in that story.
Mhm.
And I was like, whoa, like to move a character's time frame like back by like 100 years.
Because she looks cool.
Yeah, just because she looked cool. I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. But then also to be forward planning in the sense that Darth Maul was going to be the villain, like the new Palpatine sort of thing, right?
I think that's the most interesting part to me, both because we're kind of we were sort of seeing it, but more so in the early post prequel era where he is the leader of multiple crime syndicates.
Yeah.
I was just actually watching Clone Wars.
Clone Wars arc?
Season 7 like last night.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, which is hilarious that we're talking about this now.
Yeah.
Because it's just total coincidence where you get the reveal that Darth Maul is controlling multiple crime syndicates, even though the episode was kind of from the view of the Pikes.
Yeah.
And he's playing them against each other. And then in Solo, we see he's like the head honcho of Red Dawn. I think is the name, right?
Crimson Dawn.
Crimson Dawn.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's right.
So it's interesting that what George talked about happened, but through, I guess, the Dave Filoni animated stuff.
When is his interview?
This interview took place before the publishing of the book. So this interview was probably prior to 2020. I would say 2018, 2019, something in there.
So I think something to keep in mind is this interview is coming out as he's had time to think about
It's
this.
also coming out before episode 9, Disney's episode 9 hit theaters.
Right. But like, I guess I'm like, did he have do you think this is how he thought the sequels would be, like before he sold?
This is what he's saying to Paul as to what he would have done.
And I think he was under the expectation that Disney was going to complete the story with his scripts.
Yeah.
Right. I guess I was just thinking, like, how much of this has he kind of thought up as he's been seeing all of the
right? How much is
what they've done to Star Wars? Right now, he's like, he's had years after selling Star Wars to be like, oh, I totally would have done this, and I totally would have done this, and he's like, putting more thought and time into it.
Yeah.
Then he's doing the interview, and he's able to.
Yeah.
So I feel like maybe he is kind of developing more or thinking more about what he would have done.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That is interesting, especially with the quote saying he wanted to take time away from it. But when your life has been around it so long, probably so hard to let go.
Yeah.
And so you still, if it was me, I would feel like as it's coming out, I would be doing exactly that. I'd be thinking, oh, I would have done this.
Yeah. He probably couldn't help himself, but then, be like, dang, I want to like actually put more effort into like what this could have been. Yeah, if that makes sense. I was just kind of rambling there.
Yeah, no, it does make sense because, based on when this came out, or sort of based on what he's saying, he's making it seem as if this is something that he had planned.
Yeah.
But that being said, though, you get me thinking because he's had a lot of times now like analyze the full trilogy of films, and it makes me wonder, like, he's a retired guy raising his kid. I mean, everyone's got a hobby.
Well, what is supposed to be building a museum?
I mean, well, yeah, he's not physically building the museum. He's like,
no, he's there brick by brick. I think it wasn't in Chicago until they canceled it. So he had to haul the bricks.
Is that why it's taking so long? George Lucas single-handedly making the weight of this museum on his shoulders. No, I mean, like, what are the chances though that he's got like a rough, like he's just sat down and written these movies and he's like in his drawer and no one knows about them. He just did it for him,
Man. I mean, it's possible. I could see myself doing that if I was in his position.
Yeah.
But I also know that wouldn't be like a healthy thing to do when you're trying to distance yourself from it.
I mean, like maybe, yeah, sort of, right? But maybe it's just for him, right? Like maybe it's just like he's got an idea in his head. It's a bug. He's got to get it out on the page.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like he's just like to get that sense of completion. It's like, okay, I do have an idea to do these stories. I want to get them out of my head kind of thing onto a complete sort of manuscript in a way as to like, this is what would have happened and this is what I would have done. And no one needs to know that but me. But
we know he's okay with that because after the prequels, he talked about making movies for himself.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, I'd love to see some of those though.
I would love to rummage through his desk drawer. His filing cabinet.
You get 3 hours in his house and you're just ripping it apart.
Yeah.
So we did with
Every
Tolkien,
drawer, like,
same thing.
It's kind of crazy to think that these movies just were a possibility once upon a time and then just never happened. But I mean, like we don't know how far into this stage into the writing they were, right? Like these were outlines, if any, story treatments, couple pages each, like not much to go off of, but it's something.
So I'm not sure if it came out somewhere else, but I know there's always been talks that George had planned 12 from the beginning.
Yeah, that was before he did episode 4.
Yeah, because there's a paper, a photo or something of a page that has like numbers 1 through 12.
Yeah,
right?
That was before he did episode 4, but then he condensed it down to 9.
Right. And
then 6.
What was that after the original trilogy though? Because
I think when he hit Empire Strikes Back, it was going to be 6 because you
say that, but
he had put episode 5 in the opening crawl when Empire came out.
Yeah.
So like he already knew, I'm going to do 3 before A New Hope, and I'm going to do 1 more after this one.
One of the editors for Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, I was watching a video earlier today to kind of prep for some of what we're talking about, and I forget which editor, but Star Wars Theory was interviewing him, and he said, the editor, that George had planned 9. This is during Empire and Jedi.
Yeah. And I think that definitely kind of goes back and forth because I have also seen interviews with Mark Hamill where he is sort of asked George about it and, and he has said like, oh yeah, like, hey, how do you feel about doing, a story like episode 7, 8, 9, like with Luke in his later life. And that was like way back in the 80s. When he had this conversation. So I think he has gone back and forth internally, just to himself, like whether or not he wanted to do that story. And, in that process, a lot can change, right? But before he sold this company, it really, I think what also kind of drove him to get a bit more creative with sort of how these stories would have come out on screen is having treatments for episode 7, 8, 9 boosted the value of the company because all of a sudden now they were projects in production.
Right.
So like, I hate to say that as a sort of excuse for like some of these ideas being like, if you think they're like kind of half-assed or like maybe they don't work or whatever, but I wonder if maybe, some of these ideas that he had were just kind of around in his head forever, or if they were just drummed up kind of like in that early process, like, oh, do I want to sell?
He's also had the benefit of seeing what worked in the sequel trilogies, right? Because obviously he did give input, obviously, because the First Order is like, it's the Empire. They left, they made their own nation, they're coming back. There is a lot of like rebuilding for the Republic going on. But he's had the benefit of also seeing that part of the sequel trilogy kind of worked.
Yeah, and the benefit of the entire EU being kind of there, right? Yeah. Like he did work very closely with, I don't know how closely, but like, he was kind of the guy when Timothy Zahn was making his Heir to the Empire trilogy, right? Like he was the guy that, you talk to all the time was George, right? So, yeah, it makes me wonder, like what has inspired him to kind of come up with some of these ideas for his movies.
Something missing in this quote, though, which correct me if I'm wrong, in the Cliff Rose as an interview. Is that right?
Yeah, Charlie Rose.
Charlie Rose, thank you. Doesn't he talk about midichlorians playing a big role?
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he talks about how, and he doesn't mention that in this book, but on the Charlie Rose interview, he does talk about how those stories would have gone into, and I quote, a microbiology or something or another world.
Yeah, well, they all get shrunken down and go into a bloodstream.
No, yeah, I don't think it was magic school bus.
It could have been. You don't know, because he's sharing his good ideas, right? He's gonna leave out the weird stuff that he thought about. Right?
Yeah.
He's like, Chewbacca becomes a robot. He becomes an android.
But he keeps his hair.
Yeah. Well, I think like in him saying that is probably sort of, it's got a deeper meaning to it. It's like that it would have explored that in the lore, right? Like would have kind of dived into the wills a little bit more, and that's something that he wanted to do. There's another section here it's like a third section, which I'll read in just a moment. But that might sort of touch up on it a little bit as well.
Before we get that, I do want to talk if you guys like the idea of Darth Maul being the head honcho, the new Palpatine, and being a leader of this underworld.
No.
No?
Do you maybe compare that to Palpatine coming back?
It's kind of tough because Palpatine is a pretty integral part of both the prequel and the sequel and the original trilogy. But I think the main villain, right, it's really tough because I feel like you do need a villain that is not featured in your new trilogy that you're making. In the same way that I'm not really huge on them doing, if he was doing another trilogy, to make it like just a few years after Return of the Jedi. I think you need
a Snoke. A Snoke of some kind, someone in the shadows.
I want to see a trilogy about the next generation, just like in the sequel trilogy or the prequel trilogy was a different generation. It was Obi-Wan Kenobi's generation, right?
Yeah.
And then the next one is Luke's generation, and I want to see the next one. I want to see the kids, right?
And
I want to see a different villain, because I want that like separation where I'm like, this is a new trilogy. I feel like when you're only doing it a couple years after, it feels like it's kind of tied in. Like
you want the Count Dooku of the sequels, essentially, someone who no mention of him at all in the original trilogy. Maybe someone who was new at the time.
Maybe he's like alluded to. Maybe he's like a kid in the original trilogy or something like that.
You're describing what good work would be Plagueis, because he's mentioned. He used Palpatine's master and he can control. Yeah,
like
right, and then you go to
featured in and around the original trilogy, but I think that's why he makes a good villain.
And he's not a Force user, so it feels different.
Yeah. But yeah, and I think it's the same reason I'm not huge on the sequels is because because when it features so many kind of characters, it doesn't feel like its own thing. It feels like it's a continuation almost.
Yeah.
That's just my thoughts on it.
I don't mind it. Ever since they brought Maul back in the Clone Wars, I always wondered at the time because, of course, episode 7, 8, 9 were just not a reality at the time, right? Like we're talking about a time period where George was still head honcho of Lucasfilm.
Right.
It was him and Dave making Star Wars stories at Lucas Animation, and they decided to bring Maul back.
I'm curious if that was Dave's or George's idea.
That was George's idea.
Oh, okay.
Because Dave talks about that.
Okay.
He's like, we're bringing Maul back. Figure it out. And Dave's like, what? Like,
I find it funny that George specifically calls out the spider legs and then the extra large human legs, because it's exactly what happens in Clone Wars before his interview.
Yeah. Well, because it happened a long time ago. Like these moments, these Clone Wars stories happened like 2008, 11, 2010.
Okay.
A couple years before he considered selling.
Yeah.
Because Maul comes back at like the end of, they alluded to it in season 3, and then he's like for sure back in season 4. Right. So that was, and it went for 5 full seasons until they were halfway through season 6 production wise, and then it got canceled. So like it was before they sold the company easily, right? Rebels was not a thing. You know, Maul hadn't died yet. Solo hadn't been made or manufactured or thought of in any way whatsoever.
But the scripts from the end of the unreleased Clone Wars were considered canon. That seems to be what Dave Filoni used to.
That's always been the case.
On.
That's always been the case. It's like Clone Wars has always been canon to George. It's always been canon to his story. So, and therefore also to Disney and their continuity as well. So like, I think, you know, it's definitely worth noting. It's like, yeah, George did bring him back, like before doing this interview, before Disney bought the company, before any of that, like he had planned to bring him back. So like it sort of gives him that predecessing, like, you know, candidacy, I guess, like to be that villain, you know, whether it's a good fit or not. Like, you know, it's like, okay, well, if they didn't make him the villain, what would have they done with the character? Because like now that we have season 7 like fully fleshed out and everything like that, the scripts for those were kind of done up around the same time that the company was sold, because the writer Brent Friedman has gone on the record by saying like there's going to be 8 seasons of the show, all the scripts are done, and they'd had audio recordings all the way through season 7, and you know, it was good to go. Like that's part of the reason why after the show was canceled, they did things like the Dark Disciple novel, the Son of Dathomir comic. You know, they released the proxy animation episodes for things that they hadn't finished yet, things like that, right? Because like those stories were already kind of manufactured in a way, just not released, right? So I think there was a plan to keep Maul alive, like at the end of the Clone Wars, and then the real question is like, where would it have gone from there? And you know, is somehow that
before
sort of
Rebels kind of wrapped.
Before the company was sold in the first place, it's like where would they taken Maul's story? You know, if Clone Wars had finished its 8-season run with George Lucas at the helm and Dave Filoni, and like where would have they gone from there, right?
Did Darth Maul, was he already killed by Obi-Wan in Rebels by the time this interview took place?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I believe so, or very very close, very close timing. Yeah.
It's been interesting if the guy questioning George was self-aware enough to bring that up. I think that'd be an interesting question.
That would have been an interesting question. Yeah. I don't want to say he squandered the interview, but like, like I don't know. Like I think all of us would have our own like
fanboying out,
our own questions that we would have been like longing to know.
Is Mace Windu alive?
Yeah, but no, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. I think like done in the right way. I think Maul would have been all right. But you know, Darth Talon I think is the weirder one for me. I think like, is that just because she looks like him, like with the tattoos? Like,
oh well, I feel like she had to have been inspired by Maul with her tattoos from the original.
Because like we know Maul was like raised, and this is like alluded to us in the Clone Wars too. Like Maul was kind of raised as like a young boy, you know, Sith apprentice under Palpatine, you know, as like a, you know, as evil as can be from as early as possible, right? So maybe Maul kind of did that. Maybe he like took on Darth Talon when she was just like a young slave girl, something at the time, who knows, raised her to kind of be in his image, and then that's how she gets all the tattoos and everything like that. Looks like he does, and you know, keeps going from there.
Probably because I guess they're like Sith tattoos or something like that.
Something like that. Or, well, it's like for the Dathomiri, it's like a cultural thing to have all those facial tattoos. But like, you know,
but like
someone
the
like
color
him
is not.
No,
not,
yeah, I don't really know why she's red. Yeah. Not
Have we ever
sure.
seen a red Twi'lek?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah,
I think George he likes a hot Jedi every now and again.
Yeah,
he likes Quinlan Voss. He likes
a nice Twi'lek. Yeah. Good set of Leku on him.
Have you seen Quinlan Voss?
Hey, Kenobi.
It's luxurious hair.
All right, here's the next section. It's called Hope and Faith. George Lucas says, the midichlorians started the birth process in Anakin's mother. The Wills communicated the command to the midichlorians, which activated the DNA that germinated the egg, and that's why Anakin doesn't have a father. He was, in a bizarre and metaphorical way, touched by God, but in this case, they happened to be one-celled animals. Paul Duncan says, it reminds me of Perseus and Hercules and the other heroes of mythology who received their powers from the gods, usually because Zeus fathered them. Zeus is an absent father. The theme of fatherhood or lack of it runs through the saga. Qui-Gon doesn't quite become a father figure for Anakin, I don't think, but he's certainly somebody in authority who he then loses. Then Obi-Wan becomes a father figure, and later Palpatine. And the theme continues with Luke and even Jango Fett. The Kaminoans are making all these clones of him, and yet he asks for one to be unaltered so that he can raise him. George Lucas says, Jango was a father to thousands, but he wanted a son that wasn't altered to be obedient. He wanted him to have his own personality and his ability to be self-sufficient. Paul says, did the other characters, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Palpatine, have that fatherly feeling also? And George says, I think so. I think ultimately they want to mentor someone, to pass on their knowledge and training to someone else, and that's a part of fatherhood. I don't know whether you'd call it fathering, but it comes very close. Mentor and father are pretty much the same issue.
Yeah.
Paul says, Palpatine acts in a fatherly fashion. And George says, he's acting as a father, but what he's trying to do is recruit Anakin to be his trainee, his apprentice. And he's doing that because he knows that he has a high midichlorian count. So he could be a powerful Sith Lord, even more powerful than he is. It's like he's trying to build a better spaceship or a better gun, more than it is he's trying to be a father. He sees him as a weapon for the dark side. And Paul says, so he's a false father, wanting to control him. Obi-Wan becomes more of an elder brother. And George says, he's like the reluctant elder brother saying, you're not leaving him with me. I don't want to babysit anymore. I want to go out and do something good. Paul says, almost like a Han Solo. And George says, except Obi-Wan has a character that takes responsibility. Han Solo would have left him out in the desert planet somewhere. Paul says, when I first saw the films, I undervalued Obi-Wan because I followed Anakin's story. But Obi-Wan became more important to me the more I rewatched the movies. And George says, he changed the course of history because if he hadn't done battle with Anakin, Anakin would have become very powerful and would have probably gone on to be the emperor of the universe. And Paul says at the end of the duel, Obi-Wan is so personally attached to Anakin that he couldn't kill him. He couldn't bear to see him die. And George says, he's human. The Jedi are not superheroes. They're regular people, just like the rest of us. We all have midichlorians. We all have the Force within us. We can all do what the Jedi can do, but we're not trained. And the secret is training. You need somebody to train you because it won't come by its own. You don't say, oh, gee, I think I can see the future now. It's a fallacy that you can get something for nothing. If you have the talent and you work hard, then you'll achieve something. But if you have the talent and you don't work hard, you won't. That kind of it makes me think of Sabine. You know, like recently in the Ahsoka series, like we talked about this a lot. You know, it's like whether or not like it's a good decision story-wise to have Sabine become a Force user so quickly. And just kind of hearing the way that George like talks about it, it's like it's very evident. You know, his plan was always that so long as someone's disciplined enough to like be open to feeling the Force, like in the story, you know, someone would be capable of doing that, right? But the midichlorians are like a gateway. Like the more you have, like the more potential you can be, you know, like more powerful, right? Any thoughts on that? Like,
I find it interesting that he specifically calls out that if Obi-Wan had done what he had, then Anakin would have taken over everything.
Yeah.
Something I hadn't really considered, but because we've always known Darth Vader to be Darth Vader, it's hard to picture him at his full potential.
Yeah, like an alternate reality in which Anakin killed Obi-Wan.
Mm-hmm.
He becomes the most powerful Sith Lord in the galaxy.
Yeah, more powerful than Palpatine, which for us is hard to believe because Palpatine is so strong. We've always known Vader to be his underling, right?
Yeah.
Needing help to overthrow Palpatine.
Yeah. Yeah, because he's not physically capable anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's kind of tough. It's like, can I envision a universe where Anakin's, you know, the chancellor? Or like at least the head. I don't know if Anakin has like that sort of
the leadership ability.
Yeah, leadership or like the like intrigue of like kind of sneakiness to like plan and scheme, right? He's much more of a me smash, you know, kind of
right.
I think
maybe that's the difference though.
Maybe like he wouldn't like be all this sneaky. He would like be all Anakin about it and just take it by force, by pure power. Like he would overthrow the Emperor and then, find people in command at that point to like do the rest of the jobs.
Could
right?
he be compared maybe to like a Genghis Khan?
Yeah, I feel like the galaxy would be much more in flames.
Yeah.
If Anakin was.
Yeah, because everything would be brute force.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be all conniving.
Very cool to think about.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you think if George's original trilogy happened, how do you think, he was speaking a lot about having a like the fatherhood kind of father figure theme throughout all the movies. How do you think that would continue on to like his original trilogy?
I think that's another key element as to like what he would have done, right? Like, what he said earlier about how it would have been about Leia and their kids and stuff, very similar to
EU.
Very similar to the EU where it was about that, and that started with the Thrawn trilogy, with Timothy Zahn working with George to develop a story there. And even though it wasn't George's story, like it was kind of ideas peppered in there by him.
Yeah,
right?
'Cause I think Leia's pregnant in that one. I don't think she has a kid.
Aren't they born at the end of that trilogy?
Or maybe they are. It's been a
Something
while.
like she gives birth to Jason and Jaina.
Yeah.
Solo, and then in a later book series, Anakin was born. Anakin Solo, because they have 3 kids, right? And then Anakin dies at some point, and then Jason turns to the dark side and becomes Darth Caedus. Yeah, and then Jaina,
Luke and Mara Jade have Ben.
Right. Yeah, Luke and Mara Jade have Ben Skywalker.
And Mara Jade's from the Thrawn trilogy, so that might have been George's idea as well.
Yeah, right. I don't know enough about that necessarily to speak on that behalf, but yeah, I mean, like it's a wonder is like whether or not some of these ideas like were his, right? Like when it comes to that kind of thing.
I mean, he thought up like a lot of like when you were speaking of the triplets, right? Like I think it's interesting to see the kind of father figures that were in the EU, because even when you mentioned Jaina, I'm like, oh yeah, it is very interesting because Boba Fett actually is a big part of her story, and he ends up training her.
Jaina Solo?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And eventually trains her to fight Caedus, right? So she ends up killing Caedus.
Crazy.
But like it's very interesting to be like, like Boba Fett ends up. Actually, I don't really know this, but maybe it even sounds like he's a bit of her mentor, like father figure after, I'm not sure what Han Solo's out doing, but he.
Something that scallywag.
If it was up to JJ, he'd be racing, right?
If it were up to JJ, he'd be dead. Oh wait, yeah. There's not much more of this. I don't think it's worth reading the rest of it because there's nothing that relates to kind of his movies necessarily. His next couple sequels.
Any interesting pictures over there? I can't see.
Not really. It's yes and no. I mean, it's all episode 3 pictures, but yeah, it's quite a cool book. But that's it. That's like the tidbits that he kind of unveiled in the Star Wars Archives episodes 1 through 3. I recommend a lot of people go and watch that Charlie Rose interview to kind of get a bigger picture on like this whole thing. And that's definitely more like recent to when he sold the company, because this was like
it was like almost
two years later, maybe.
Yeah,
year and a half, 2 years later. Yeah,
because I recall it was after.
It was before Force Awakens came out.
Was it before?
Yeah, it was before.
Okay, because around a similar time, because I recall watching the interview and being curious of what George had originally written compared to what JJ did.
Yeah.
So how does knowing this information affect your view on what we have now? Does it change it at all? Is this helpful or like?
I'm still unsure what to think about it. I think all I can think about is I would have liked to have seen his movies.
Right. Like that's the takeaway is just like, like that.
Yeah. Missed out. I mean, artistically, I think compared to what we got, there's good. I think it's kind of what we talked the whole podcast. There's good and there's bad. I don't know. Again, same as you, Bryce. I don't know how I feel about Darth Maul being the big bad. it feels like a backup villain.
Yeah.
He's the enforcer.
Yeah.
Type villain, right? I've never thought of Darth Maul as a mastermind type villain like Palpatine. He's more of an enforcer. Like
I'm not opposed to Maul being back, but there needs to be a bigger head honcho. It just because if you're doing a trilogy to trilogy, unless you can do something completely different, you can't just have another bad guy that's not bigger than the previous guy. That feels weird to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think what they've done with Maul in like the current series, is it's like it's working.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's the best idea, but they've made it work. Like I don't think the current Maul that we have, I think they've done pretty well.
Yeah.
And I do like it. I do like the merging of this like crime syndicate because I love having the Hutts be more of the issue and stuff. I think that is a great idea, and having like this big conglomeration of crime families is a great idea.
Are the Hutts not in the syndicate?
No, I don't think so.
No. Yeah, because that was kind of like the thing in the Clone Wars, like when Maul tries to recruit them all, he burns a lot of the Hutts on Nal Hutta because like they don't join him.
I thought they did.
And then they end up being coerced into it for a brief moment, and then they leave again.
Okay, but the rest of them all stay in it.
Yeah, I forget. It's
that was always confusing to me because it seemed like in Clone Wars it fell apart, and then all of a sudden it was there again in like Solo.
Yeah. So basically, what happens is he builds his Shadow Collective, right, in Clone Wars. That all kind of crumbles when he takes over Mandalore the first time, and Palpatine shows up, kills his brother, Savage Opress, takes him prisoner, right? Then you read the Son of Dathomir comic book, and he's in captivity.
Yeah.
And he gets liberated by some of his loyalists, some of his Mandalorian super commandos, one of them being, I believe, Gar Saxon. And then he gets out, right? A bunch of stuff happens in that comic book. And these are 4 adapted episodes into this comic book, by the way. And then he eventually crawls back to his mother, right? Mother Talzin, which we find out is his actual mother. And she ends up dying, gives her life for his. Grievous kills her. And he gets away, barely, right? And then when we pick things up in season 7, he is now come back. He's sort of from the ground up again, brought together some of those old allies, and they have caught Mandalore in a very awkward place because he's killed Satine at this point. They're in shambles, like still, and there's no Republic protection still, right? So he kind of reclaims Mandalore, and that's when Bo-Katan comes after Ahsoka for help.
Yeah.
Right. And so on and so forth.
That's when we get season 7.
And that's when we get season 7. That's when we get the Siege of Mandalore. Yeah. And then Order 66 happens. Maul gets beat by Ahsoka. He gets away from the whole Order 66 thing, and once again, he's got nothing. And he starts from scratch again.
But
then
rebuilds the same thing.
Rebuilds the same thing again. Yeah. And this is something that Sam Witwer has said in an interview. He's like trying to push a boulder up a hill. Right? He's like, he keeps on rolling back down again, knocking him over. And so like the next time you see him again, it's like his 3rd attempt. He's like trying to build his crime syndicate with Crimson Dawn. And, this starts very early on with the Solo story, 5 years after episode 3. And then, when you see him again in Rebels, all of that is supposedly gone. Right?
Yeah.
Supposedly.
And we don't know how long, because now he's been trapped on, what's the name of the planet?
Yeah, Malachor.
Malachor 5.
Yeah, because so like there's another story. There's a missing piece here because like none of us have read the Crimson Dawn comic book and the Hidden Empire comic book. It was like the stories that kind of follow.
I think I read it.
Did you read it?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe you can fill us in.
I don't remember it.
Okay. Yeah, there we go.
Never mind.
All I know is it's all about Kira, right? And she, I believe she finally decides to like act against the Empire. using like all the assets she has.
Oh, so she takes Crimson Dawn and kind of becomes part of the rebellion.
Pretty much, she like at the end of the Hidden Empire series, from what I can remember, she actually does this huge strike on the Empire. She loses everything in the process, but stops some sort of big imperial plot from kind of happening. I kind of forget why she has to do that, because it's kind of like a there's some bigger plot going on that I'm not quite remembering, but
there's a book coming out soon which sort of flows into all this, because there's still kind of a missing piece between Solo and Rebels, and then following Rebels, these comics which have Kira and the sort of the the downfall of Crimson Dawn, right? Or sort of what she rules over after Darth Maul's dead, right? And it's called Crimson Reign. It's a book being published by E.K. Johnson, I believe, a Canadian author, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And it's supposed to be, it's going to be good. I think it just came out recently, so I think that might be the next book review that we do at some point. But yeah, it's going to be, I think, filling in some of the gaps. But yeah, I think the question being like, where the story's gone with Maul right now. Like, are we all happy with where they took that character?
It felt like a fitting end. Him meaning Obi-Wan, I will say that.
I'd agree there. I do feel like they really they forced it a little, because obviously they wanted him back, fans wanted him back, and I feel like they molded him into a plot that they wanted, but a plot that didn't necessarily fit for him.
Mm-hmm. And now that we know, like from this, like a plot that may have changed, right? Like, when he came back, it was George's idea. Like maybe there was a different plan in place.
Right.
Now all this other stuff has to happen. He's popping up in comic books, popping up in Rebels, and
I mean, it's
Solo.
kind of par for the course if fans love a character enough.
They'll accept
it's the same
anything.
thing that happened with Boba Fett and how prevalent he is, and Boba Fett became Jango Fett. Look how important he is to the world
Right.
now.
Yeah.
Funny you bring that up though, because Boba Fett also becomes a crime lord.
All these failures of life, becoming a crime lord.
Again,
It's a backup
it's
plan.
the same problem. That is the same issue I have with Maul being a crime lord, is that they're not the kind of people that would seek that out.
Right. It feels like
seems
a changed character.
It seems like both of those people would be like above that. They'd be like, why would I lower myself to interact with this scum?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I buy it with Maul a bit more than Boba.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do. But not. I see what you're saying though, and I do agree.
Yeah, because Maul, it's more about I'm using these people. I'm not
Right.
seeing them as an equal. They're like my
Yeah,
heroes, right?
He's trying to use that to attain. Eventually, he wants to overthrow Palpatine, right? That's really his goal.
I think it goes to show his level of
So he gives
desperation,
up.
though. Like he's desperate for sort of any sort of ground to try and crawl upwards, right? Because he's got nothing.
They should have made him into like Team Rocket, and at the end of every episode, he gets like punted into space, and he's like, "I'll be back," and he's like
Blasting off again.
That's the true push.
I'll get you, Kenobi.
Next time.
Every episode, he's trying to kidnap Ezra so he can clone him. Evil cloned Ezra.
Oh man.
And then this was the original plan, because then he has like Darth Talon. That's the Jesse and
Right.
James.
Yeah.
And then he just needs a little Meowth.
See, that was yeah, exactly.
Report.
So but like in Clone Wars, he still had the
Mothman.
crime syndicate kind of plan going on, but at least it didn't happen like a third time with Crimson Dawn.
Yeah.
Right. At least he was like, okay, get some sense, like let's lie low for a while, raise an apprentice, kind of like what my master did. Wait till things blow over with his plan, and then I'm going to come in swinging.
Well, he did that with Savage.
Yeah, but that failed miserably because like Palpatine came in, he found out about Savage, right? He put all his cards on the table way too soon. Like he took over a planet during his master's grand plan, causing a bit of a problem for him.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, oh, you know what? I'm going to deal with this myself. So he shows up personally, kills the guy, and then takes his brother prisoner, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what? Like that didn't work out too well. So, I think maybe after that he got some sense. Thankfully he survived. But like, maybe he would have had some sense and be like, okay, this time I'm gonna lie low. And that being said, though, I mean, Clone Wars season 7 / would have been 8 at the time, still written. Maybe we still would have had something there with Ahsoka and Maul. Who knows what surrounding events would have happened around that? But I think that was still bound to happen. So he tries his luck again, with the crime syndicate thing, because he's still got allies. It's still kind of a foundation there. And until it all kind of goes to crap, that was the plan. And then, it's like, okay, now what's he going to do? What's George going to do with that character now? So like, maybe that's why he was thinking like, oh, well, I brought him back. I'm going to make him sort of what I intended his sort of character to be in the beginning, which was like a Sith Lord in the shadows, a Phantom Menace. Let's actually make him the Phantom Menace again. But this time the focus is going to be on his apprentice, because it's the next generation. He's an old man now. So like, let's not make him the Ray Park flippy dippy do character that we first
everyone
met.
becomes more wise, right?
Yeah.
With time. And I think even Maul has that. Yeah, he has that potential to also be like that, right?
Yep. Yeah, I like his portrayal in Rebels for that. For that reason. Sam Witwer did a good job making him like an older man.
Yeah. Trying to recruit Ezra.
Yeah. Whenever you think of Maul, you think of the young Ray Park doing backflips and stuff. But it's like
they're different, eh? They're very
different evolution of the character, right? And it's like, it's a wonder to think like what this character would have been like given another 15 years, wherever that time frame's supposed to be for George's movies, right? Like, what would he have been like then? Where has he been? What's this character gone through that's brought him to this point of now feeling ready that he can take over the galaxy, like his master did? Like, what's his plan all about? So I think it does make me interested, a lot. Like, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, you know what? I like George's ideas.
I would need a lot of character growth. I just think where we left off on Maul and becoming Palpatine, there's still too much of a gap. But
yeah, fair enough. Cool. Well, let's wrap this up.
That's good. I feel like we all have to come up with our own. Let's write our own script. Let's
write our own sequels.
Version of the original trilogy.
Well, apparently, yeah. Well, we have an episode planned for a few weeks away, which is all about Alan Dean Foster's episode 9. I think this is your idea in the podcast ideas channel in our Discord server.
Yeah, I read this script.
It was a really bad kind of like outline for episode 9. And Alan Dean Foster's written some Star Wars novels in his day. And he wrote Splinter of the Mind's Eye, right? Like that first Star Wars EU book ever. The really weird one.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So that was him. So he wrote just like try my luck, episode 9. You'll see how it goes, right?
So if I remember, this takes place after Rian Johnson's episode 8. This is just an alternate 9.
Yeah, it's just an alternate 9. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This happened after JJ's version came out, and he had this, like, he wrote this. I was like, this is what I would have done, and it was really bad. So we're gonna read it and then talk about it.
Sounds fun. I think it just goes to show that writing Star Wars is a lot harder than it seems.
It is very hard.
It means a lot of things to a lot of people, and it's hard to make everyone happy.
Who knows? Maybe there's some things that we would have liked in there, right? Like, maybe there's some things in there that we're like, oh, that's actually a really great idea. But guess we'll find out.
Yeah. Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Let's do it.
All right. Bryce, Blake, good to have you back on as usual.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, it was a good time.
And we will see you in the next one.
We'll see you out there. Keep flying.
All right. Thank you so much to all of you guys who've tuned in thus far. And if you want to reach us here at Star Wars Escape Pod, you have all the ways to contact us in the description below. Our email is swescapepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube with the handle @SWEscapepodcast. There's a link to our Discord in there as well. If you join that up, that's where the chat is happening. Actually, I'm lying. It's very quiet in there. That's why we need you to join and talk about some Star Wars stuff. So if you have not checked out the latest episode of the podcast prior to this one, of course, definitely do that. Our friend Kyle from Alki Solutions came on, chatted about his company, chatted about lightsabers. If you're into lightsabers, which I'm sure you are, it's for you. We'll see you in the next episode of Star Wars Escape Pod. May the Force be with you.